Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Enable Now Knowledge Transfer session dealing with recognition technology and the assistance. As always, as first, if you don't want your name, your face, the questions you ask, or whatever personal being visible to others, please disconnect now because this meeting is now recorded. All right, our topic today, recognition technology. We have to deal with that for reasons. Let's have a look to the agenda. It's the second session for today. I held the same in the morning already, where we realized that I need to speed up a bit in the beginning to not lose too much time for the second half that deals with web assist. So I probably have to speak a bit faster. Anyhow, please unmute yourself anytime where you have a question. I'm not 100% observing the chat, so I would always prefer if you would talk to me. Because this is an important topic. It's important for several reasons. The major one is that it's the heart of the actual solution to understand how a context is created and how all that works. On the other hand, if it's not dealt with in a proper way, we have a mismatch regarding expectations. Expectations are set out of the sales process, and there things are probably explained a bit too loose. We can record everything, we can do everything. For sure we can, but there are several options and several ways to get there. And you as consultants really have to understand those ways. Otherwise, we could end up in trouble. Okay, so what's the agenda about? Re-recording, web assistant, desktop assistant. So what is all this re-recognition actually for? Then we try to get contexts clarified, what context type is used by which technology, and why should they be all considered as one conglomerate of functionalities, not as either or. Then going down to the detail level of desktop assistant, we're going to look at page keys and their replacements or neutralizing. And why this is important, look closer to application profiles and the newer playback profiles that have been invented 1 or 2 releases ago, I believe, and what those guys are for. Then we will have a look to the AAI, the Advanced Application Identification Mode, which speeds up desktop assistant dramatically, but that the prerequisite to really be able to use that in a proper way is understanding all the above. And then we're going to move forward to how web assistant is actually considering contexts and dealing with contexts. What about the context maintenance and an outlook to what's coming regarding desktop assistant. And then I will emphasize on that one mandatory portion of the strategy and configuration phase for all Enable Now deployment services, which is called recognition validation, which summarizes all the above in the concrete customer situation and is a mandatory part of the service to be delivered. And to my knowledge, at least, it's never happening, which is not good, which is the root cause for some escalations that ended up on my desk in the last weeks and months. So we should avoid that. All right, again, anytime, please disconnect, unmute yourself if you have questions, and jump in as soon as you realize that it becomes too complex. It's a complex topic. We cannot change it. It becomes quite technical. It most likely will be one of the most theoretic sessions that we ever had, but that's related to the topic. What can we do? So I'm trying to speed up, keeping some more time for the questions after, but maybe you are flexible and we could extend half an hour. I believe that could happen. All right, so let's get started. Performance support and Enable Now. All the slides that we already know, but now just focusing on the previously discussed. Where is our re-recognition capabilities actually primarily working in our 3-layer content architecture, let's say. So basically, the recognition capabilities of Enable now are important everywhere. They are important for any content creation because the recorder as such is already working based on the recognition. That means knowing what object we are dealing with, what object the interaction was upon. Was it a button? Was it a hyperlink? Was it a radio button that was selected? All this is coming from our famous application profiles. And based on those application profiles, the re-recognition of something that was once recorded or once contextualized is especially important in the bottom part, which is the on-the-job support, the performance support, the in-app help, however you want to call it nowadays. This is the context-sensitive area where things become most important. The desktop versus web assistant discussion, I mean, again, it's a slide that we all have seen already, but just to wrap it up and bring the whole thing into context, what is the big difference? Well, the big difference between the two assistant systems that rely on robust re-recognition is the fact that one, the desktop assistant, is a client application that runs on a Windows machine, which brings us to the last line item in this comparison table that says, yeah, the web assistant just needs a browser because it's implemented in the target application. And it could run on any machine that has a browser, on a tablet, whether it's Android or whatever exotic operational system it might have. It would work on a Mac, it will work on a Linux machine. The only prerequisite is a browser, while the desktop assistant as a client application is strictly limited to Windows machines. Both can do guided tours and desktop assistants. Default content, standard content is only available for desktop assistant. All right, we know all about that. It's already embedded per default in, I should have put an EG instead of the for, because there are several applications already equipped with desktop, with web assistant, as you know. Based on that, this extensibility case where we can mix custom content and standard content in runtime together is something which is exclusive to the web assistant as well. There comes the misunderstandable part. No? The desktop assistant is covering both web and desktop applications. That's true. And that's the misleading portion. It works application spanning. It works coming from SAP GUI to Excel to wherever and back in one run. So there can be application spanning guided tours being created, very complex ones. This is exclusive to desktop assistant. The web assistant comes closer because it's now app spanning already, but nevertheless, this is exclusive to DA, and it supports out-of-the-box individual and unknown applications as well, while web assistant is supposed to be integrated into the target application and only supports applications it is built in, obviously. So that's the big comparison table. From a feature perspective, they are both on the same level as you see here, but technically they couldn't be more different. And that's diametral from a technological perspective. So that's a bit of the root cause of all those problems, because with the one thing we can do things that the other can't do, and vice versa. And sometimes we realize that already in the sales process, the customer is asked what you want, web or desktop assistant. And since web is sounding far more fancy, they say we're going to do web assistant, and the desktop assistant is left out of scope, which is not an option in most of the cases where we want to go with EPSS enterprise-wide and trying to cover all of the components and programs and applications that are used. And not everything is in the web. That will happen sooner or later, but nowadays it is not the case. So that's the reason why I just want to emphasize on the fact that we as consultants, at least, we cannot blame the sales guys for that, but however, we as consultants should not talk components. I want you to talk about a solution. The solution is EPSS with Enable Now, and that comes with 2 delivery methods, channels, clients, however you want to call it, which are called that web and desktop assistant. And in a very early stage of the project, you have to make your customer clear that the one guy and the other guy are seen complementary to each other to be able to cover a complete modern workspace. This is not an either-or decision, even if it was positioned like that before we come into play. Yeah, so this is a very important fact. I just put that as a key message on the first slide here. We come back to this a couple of times during the session today. Yeah, but again, it's just emphasizing you on, hey, it's one solution, and that one solution covers everything. Only using one or using the other will always leave gaps behind. This is the whole thing from a 70-28 perspective. I mean, yeah, we are looking for EPSS. This is what people are looking for, and that makes 70% of the usage of our material, at least based on Mr. Jennings. Yeah, so a robust and reliable re-recognition of contexts is essential. Low manual post-editing effort in the initial phase where it's about content creation, that's one thing. The other thing is any re-recognition, that means any automated re-recording, and all the re-recognitions that the assistance systems would require to work properly and conform to the expectation of the single user requires re-recognition. And no re-recognition, no context sensitivity, and no context sensitivity, basically not that much of performance support, at least not what people would expect from a solution like that. So this is just to set the context, nothing new to you, most likely or hopefully, but let's proceed. So this is where we come from, and now let's have a closer look to that complete concept of recognition and re-recognition. I'm trying to demystify the whole thing a bit, because what we realized is the fact that in many projects, that complete technological aspect of recognition and re-recognition is simply ignored. That's a major requirement if you want to handle the customer expectations properly. And my goal for this session is that all of you will, after, be able to speak clear words in the context of what is possible and what's not, being able to execute first-level feasibility studies on unknown applications, decide for the right delivery channel to choose to cover the corresponding target application, etc. So let's see, we start with Adam and Eve now and talk about, oh no, we don't. The Enable Now context, man. There's a lot of contexts all over the place. There's the context, there's the desktop assistant context, and we have the web assistant context and the learning app context. And if that wouldn't be enough, no, within projects, within context objects, we also have the page key, and then there is the context again. So what is this all about? In the first run, you might think, oh, these guys have a very funny sense of humor, so why are they mixing all this up? So now we're going to try to clarify what property is for what purpose and why it's located on container level within the prop sheet of the single object, and why it's part of a project, and why this is so confusing in the first run. So let's try to figure out which of those many contexts are used for what purpose. Therefore, it's the next table. Let's go through this, and then we're going to go into detail one by one. First of all, the secret spice that we're always discussing in all the trainings. I believe we already had several sessions where we talked about page keys in detail. It lives inside projects. It's per screen, because you could change your context screen by screen. So obviously that's necessary, and it's used for re-recording and for the desktop assistant. So the re-recorder relies on the page key's robustness, and the desktop assistant does. And the page key is not on position 1 by the chance, it's just there because it's the most important context parameter from desktop assistant's perspective, at least. Yeah? This is where the value is generated. Then we got this context information property that's rather new, no, since 2 releases, and it lives on projects on container level in the property grid of the container, and it's read-only. So what it is for, it actually displays the information of a famous thing called header, which we're gonna discuss in detail some slides later. It's part of the application profile called header, and the consolidation of all page keys that are used for the desktop assistant, just to have an idea. Okay, so that's what this guy is for, the context information, and since it's read-only, it's just an information. The one called context, still called context because of some historical reasons, it's never been renamed basically, is a bit abused. It has 2 purposes. It hosts the old world pull help contexts. I don't know whether you ever use this. We're gonna, one slide further, I'm just about to discuss this with you quickly at least. Still handy, still sometimes if you face older world applications, old whatever web applications that the customer is relying on, it's your only chance to get a context sensitivity implemented, and it's easy to implement. That's an important part. And it lives in both dimensions inside project, again per screen, so it has the same idea that the page key has, but it's displayed a bit differently. I'm going to show you in a second how. And on container level as well, which is also a consolidation. And for all non-recorded entities, everything which is not a project, it's there as well, but it does not consolidate anything. This is where you would record your, for instance, web assistant context into if you want to put a single book page or a book or a text unit into the learning section of web assistant. This is where this would be hosted in. Then, just going 2 steps back, we have that single section of properties here, which we call the web assistant context, which is the equivalent to the application context of the desktop assistant, but for web assistant. And it comes with 3 actual properties: product name, version, and system. Later on, we're going to have a closer look what those are for and how they are used. And last but not least, context, desktop assistant, one more context, which is a container level object in the property grid of Project Explorer, but for all entities except projects. Why is that? Because the page key is something which is generated within projects. So the project as such knows where it belongs to automatically because it has been created somewhere. And any other object type, like a book page, a book, a group, a text unit that you want to put into context for desktop assistant, needs to be contextualized manually, which is that record context button, also on container level. And this context information needs to be stored somewhere, and that's where it's stored. The desktop assistant for manually recorded page keys for non-recorded objects like everything but not projects. Okay, so that was the quick overview and probably a good spreadsheet for your reference in customer workshops, because people tend to get confused about all those contexts and start modifying things in one context that is actually not used for the actual case and stuff. So probably this helps. As always, if you see room for improvement, if you want something to be phrased differently in the materials or enhanced, let me know, and I will do my best to incorporate your ideas. Good. Any questions till now? No. Good. Then let's go ahead. To not forget our old world, this is where we originally came from when there was no desktop and no web assistant. It's a little 80s, honestly, but it's still handy to know how it actually works because it's easy. Yeah, and sometimes if you have no other chance, because for what reason ever the target application might not work on none of the assistants and desktop assistant fails because it's whatever, an AS400 program from 1979, whatever reason, and this might be your last resort. Yeah, and it's still working fine and properly. But how does it actually work? First of all, again, going back to the slide before, the context is what this is for. And if there is an SAP recording used for that context, we have key value pairs. T-code is session manager. Mandate is 800. Database system is 0. Program is something. DynPro is something. The system is something. So basically, it's variables with values. And they are created during recording. And they are put into that context parameter on container level, and they feed a file called context HTML. This context HTML file is a single file that could be hosted anywhere, and it has to be created manually each time something changes. Yeah? And it's not part of a regular publication. It needs to be created manually. Let me just quickly go back to producer to show you where. Work area, publish, there we go, export context file. This is exactly that functionality that creates that context file that you either upload back to your manager and use that address or use any other server. That doesn't matter where it's hosted, as long as it's reachable via HTTP, it's fine. This context file is actually just a mapping table that says if this T-code is active, this learning object should be part of the result list. And it's built in SAP GUI and built in the enterprise portal. Both configurations are ultra easy. We don't go into details here. You have a look at the corresponding manuals. What happens if the user, it's pull help, so the user has to request help actively. That plugin creates an additional help menu entry for that purpose. User presses it, there is a black box process in SAP GUI, it's built in, that reads the defined context parameters and builds an URL. So that's just a couple of lines of code, not that much. It says, hey, on my server, wherever that is, in my context, there is this context HTML file, and after the question mark, I just forward all relevant context parameters to it and give it over to the JavaScript, which is inside that context file, and that context file gives me back a list of learning objects that match to that query. That's basically it. I will skip the presentation if you want to know how that works. If you really come into the situation where this is needed, have a look at Info Center. This is well described there, including all the interactions and stuff. Or drop me a message and we can have a heads up and discuss. What I just want to emphasize on, and this is easily forgotten, the context HTML approach is fully generic. That means it's key value pairs here. T-code is session manager. Mandate is, this is all coming from SAP. I give you that one example in my favorite transaction called SU01, where we have a T-code session manager because that's where the session started, and a T-code SU01 because that's the actual transaction, and plenty of others. But that should already be enough, together with the language, to build a proper help on the level of the transaction, right? So this is the consolidated one, and the single ones, they come from inside, and this is where you could tweak them. Yeah? This is where you could modify the single context parameters one by one. Again, the same is used for web assistant. And the approach of context HTML is fully generic. Yeah? It's not saying that it's requiring a T-code with a specific value. You could have your own variable, like my help ID equals 1234, which gives you the option to implement a pull help functionality basically in any application if you want, which is sometimes the only chance you got. So I'm not saying that this should be a promoted solution, but nevertheless, sometimes it's the only existing one, and you should have that on the radar as an option. There is one link to an SAP note that gives you the option to refine the document selection even further down. Not only the parameters that are created per default, you get additional ones, which are specific to the user, like the company code. You could say somebody from company code A sees something different than somebody else who's coming from company code B. This is something which is exclusive to this functionality. Yeah, so only pull help can do that. The others can't. So probably keep it in mind. Yeah, so just park it somewhere in the back of your mind and get it back as soon as you think you need it. Or again, ask for a heads up. So I just want to have that in the session because it's also a context and it also makes sense to know. But even if it's still very ancient. Yeah, I have probably a handful of customers still working with it. So now come to the new world examples. Recognition from page key to profile. Now we talk recording, re-recording, and desktop assistant. Now they are all relying on the same data. And we're going to focus on the hierarchy of recognition first, and then we go closer and in detail into the page keys, and then cut one profile at least apart and make her understand what parts of the profile are relevant for which functionality and how to read them. Not fully, I can do that neither. I'm not a developer, but in parts you should be aware what those things are doing. That's a bit of the key takeaway here. So let's see. Desktop assistant or recording or re-recording, they use context concepts which are hierarchical. And this hierarchy is starting with the application. In a Windows system, the application is identified by the executable, which is responsible for the window which is in focus. If you have a Word window in front of you, the executable, the exe file that hosts this window is the WinWord exe. If you have a SAP GUI window in front of you, the executable that is responsible for that window is the SAP logon.exe. In Windows, all executable names are unique per default because that's like the Highlander, there can be only one. Yeah, so it's not possible to run two executables that have the same name at the same time. So we can validly pretend that with Desktop Assistant, we will be able to provide performance support on application level for each and every application existing on that planet, independent from its age or technology or whatever, because we are only looking for that one parameter called executable name. Okay. There are also two buts, but not for remotely hosted applications, Citrix and AppV, all those virtualizations. In that case, on the local client, you would see the Citrix client as the executable, and the application that it hosts inside is transparent for the host operational system. So take care with everything which is somehow virtualized. Yeah? This could kill this approach, but nevertheless, for all natively, regularly, locally executed applications, we can validly say on application level, we are good with everything. Next level is the page, and this is considered as being the most important context level, since this is what context sensitivity comes from. I want to know where exactly inside my application I am currently. And based on that, the online help result list should be built upon. Yeah? Should be the base data for any performance support. What guided tours will be offered to me, what learning objects will be offered in the result list, what alerts should be prompted, attention, there's a change. This is all related to the page. The page context is called the page key. This is where we're going to go into details now. And the page key's structure, so what attributes are part of that key, this is determined by the application profile which was used to record the single object, either a single context for a book page or a text unit, or the whole project. In all cases, the application profile is that one thing that manages the rest of the recognition, and later on for the re-recognition. Doing that, Enable now receives those informations from common user interface APIs interfaces that are also, in most of the cases at least, used by screen readers for blind people to use computers. Yeah, so the big story is if a screen reader is able to deal with a certain application, most likely we are as well, to a certain level. The common ones are MSAA, Microsoft Accessibility API, and UIA/UIA.com. Newer Microsoft interfaces. For Java, there's a specific one called Java Access Bridge, and some more, but we're going to see them all in detail later. Be aware if you train this, because for web application, this concept is not working. Why is that? Because the application is pointing to an executable, and a web application is always running in a browser. So the application will always be Chrome exe, for Chrome being your standard browser, or edge.exe if Edge is your standard browser, or iExplore.exe for Internet Explorer. And that's what you don't want. All the helps for all the web applications within one context, that would not make that much sense. So basically here for web applications, and the page, if we talk about keys, takes over the role of the application as well. And the pages, the page keys for web applications always contain the URL, and the first portion of the URL that should identify the application. So there, for web apps covered with Desktop Assistant, we have to go one step further. Yeah, and then the last one is the object context, and objects are using the same interfaces again, yeah, and those interfaces, they tell us, okay, you click me and I can tell you what I am. I am a button, my name is save, this is my position, yeah, and all those informations are used by the recorder to create the interaction advice, to create the interaction advice texts, etc. Yeah, and in HTML documents, meaning in websites of any kind, we analyze the DOM model, the actual source code of the website. We traverse through that hierarchical source code, and we find the actual object there. And in best case, it is equipped with a corresponding object type, standard object type. If not, if the website developer created that control on his or her own, we need to train it, and that means we need a specific profile for that purpose. But basically, that's the story, and the big important info is the pluses in between. They are always pairs of each other. There is no standalone page, and there is never a standalone object. A page lives in an application, and an object lives within a page which lives in an application. Yeah, so the highest precision rate for recognition we got is the object, but that's always in context of a page, which is always in context of an application. Yeah, so you could not say, I create an object context for all saved buttons that exist, and saying if you click that one, your document will be saved. Yeah, it's that save button for that one context for, let's say, Microsoft Word that you equip with help, not all of them in one run. This is sometimes misunderstood, actually. Yeah? So they are pairs of each other, so they come together. So let's see how this all plays. There is that profile that is used, that profile, and the super famous profile header is the most important part of that profile. And we need to understand that. First of all, let's look at this in a practical way. Let me just clean my trash. Where are application profiles? Application profiles are a section of the resources. Those application profiles, and there are plenty of them, are either some kind of standard. The generic web application is a standard profile for all web applications which are not somehow part of this list here, which is not SAP Hybris and not SAP Sales Cloud and not SuccessFactors and not the UI5 app and not any of the older SAP web applications like WebDyn Pro or Enterprise Portal. None of them anything else. SharePoint is a good example. Works brilliantly fine with generic web applications. The Google Start page, you will see in a second, works works fine with this. So this is a generic one, a fallback profile if there is no specific one. The other as important one is the standard profile, which would be the generic one for any desktop application which is not on that list. So not an Office product, not, no, that's it. Yeah? Only for us, for Office products, we have standard actually. So this is the story. We're going to go into more details later. So let's have a look at the generic web applications profile. To understand what that thing actually does, it's necessary to look at it from a file system perspective. Yeah? From here, the only thing that we know is that its name is generic web app. That is the second revision of that profile, and it supports HTML-based applications running in Internet Explorer. So there's a description text missing. It should say in Internet Explorer and Edge, Chromium and Chrome if the corresponding plugins are actually installed. The Chrome and Edge plugins are essential for re-recognition in browsers. Why is something that we come to later, but keep that in mind. That's what the plugins actually do. They give us the option to inject our analytics code into the target application to actually be able to find out where we are. No plugin, no EPSS on the browser. That's a simple fact. So let's look at it from here. Generic web applications. They are all built up in more or less the same way. Some have a bit more, some have a bit less, but in fact, those four they all have in common. The entity descriptor that they all have, it's just the entity as such, describing everything as for all the objects that is visible here on that level. And then we got the header and the recognition part, and then some scripts to be injected if it's a web application, to be injected into the web application to be able to recognize everything properly. So this is tools used by this. So what's the difference between header and recognition? Header is used for overall properties of that specific application profile, and it contains the dialect which should be used to create the page key. This is a header information. Let's have a look. So I still have the stuff open from the morning. So let's clean up here. So this one says blah blah blah. Some executables that are accepted. iExplore is in that case equivalent to Edge. But this section now is where our focus should be. It says my page key attributes for a generic web application is the title of the page and the URL of the page. And then it says for HTML, there are functions to be executed together, those two parameters, title and URL. And one is called get title, and the other is called blah, 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 get URL. And they live somewhere. Let's see. Recognition, very tiny. What's that? Oh, the recognition part that gives us the actual recognition references files, and that means there is an include mechanism in place. So one profile can use the definitions of another. Yeah? Like in any programming language, you would use classes from another piece of code, and that's the same approach. Yeah, so here we just have to follow HTML basic. Coming back to here, saying, oh, that's the profile it uses, obviously. And there we find a bit more. You see the files are much larger. There's more information in there. And there within the recognition, we will find the way how the single objects are created or identified. And also within the script section, we're gonna find those it doesn't matter, I can show you the screenshot, but that function that I was mentioning earlier that identifies the single page is also living in here. So major takeaway, a profile is a rule set a rule set for recognition and later on also for the re-recognition. The most important level of recognition is the page. The page key is where is a set of parameters that are intended to identify a specific context within 100% validly, and how this page key is built, this is something which is always stored in a header. So let's have a look at this from the slide deck's perspective. Summarizing again, a profile can use different other parts of this application profile section as libraries, including them, so taking advantage of them. Each profile contains several files. One is called the header. The header file is actually the rule set to create the page keys. In this particular example, it's a web application. So for web applications, we use JavaScript injected into the target application. For common browsers like Chrome and Edge Chromium, this is only possible using the Enable Now plugin. No plugin, no chance, not even to record. And those functions here are stored in the script.js of the corresponding profile. And this function get title, ultra simple. It just says the current window, DOM model, title, return it if it's not about blank. Yeah, makes total sense. So this is how all this plays together. In the first run, it looks quite complex. If you really understood how all those components are bound together, is pretty much straightforward. What is our finding now? If a target application, let's pretend we talk about a web application that cannot be equipped with Web Assistant. Because for now, we do not support third-party integrations. This will start with some POCs with the next release. Or why? Because it's simply not possible, because the customer prefers using DA or whatever. If a target application provides some kind of a static object that contains the context, for instance, a hidden field somewhere that has a static address in that model using this user interface language from Microsoft, or has a specific context ID that could be gathered by a script functionality. By the way, this is exactly what we lately did with an Oracle platform. So they used an Oracle application, and that Oracle application provides this context using a specific JavaScript function. We did exactly the same. We added one attribute here pointing to that particular function, which was called once every page change, and it works like a charm. So we had Desktop Assistant up and running on that application after a day. If this is granted, and this is the discussion that you have to have with the customers, technical responsibles, if this is granted, it's most likely, or more than likely, that Enable Now will be able to cope with that target application. We will be able to identify its context. There is things to do, but it's not rocket science. This is what I want to make you understand. We do not talk about ultra complex heuristical analysis here or something. We just have to ask that one question: do you provide something that gives me a unique ID of that particular context, and how could I access that? And that's the way to go forward. Any questions till now? Then let's go ahead. So what happens during initial recording? On any interaction with a target application, whatever, a click, a drag, the first thing that happens is actually a lookup of the particular application profile. The application profile has a header, and the header has a section called page ID, and this page ID section gives us at least a list of parameters that have to be gathered from the target application to be able to identify the context validly. So based on this rule, the page key is written, and now you see how this belongs together. That list says for SAP. SAP is not a web application. We are talking about the SAP GUI here. So basically the gathering, how this is actually read from the target application, is a black box for us. This is nothing that we could influence. That's basically the reason why for the previous example, I was choosing a web application, because this is something that we can touch. We understand it immediately. Yeah, there's a function injected to the page that asks, what's your title? And the function gives you the title, and then you put the title into the property. Those guys here, they do the same, but that SAP processor is using specific interfaces, and the code is not visible and touchable by us. That's part of the core. But nevertheless, what we're going to end up with is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parameters foreseen in the profile. The box goes around the ones that are listed. There is one more. Why could that be? The SAP profiles, they foresee 6 parameters, and the parameter is only being put into that page key if it exists. And that parameter called ACT_tabs means active tab, which refines the context furthermore on an SAP application which has tabs, which my example, the user maintenance screen, does not have. Which means this creates a certain flavor of that particular page key, where the definition says your max of properties to be 100% valid is 6, but 1 is optional, which is not in here. This is how you read that, okay? Keep that in mind, that there is options, and because later, as soon as we talk about playback profiles, this is something that you have to recall. So what happens during recording? Second step, as soon as this page is gathered, let me just fast forward because I made a mistake here. No, I didn't, sorry. Next slide is where my mistake is. The second one that says, okay, now the interaction is analyzed, meaning the interaction as such, where's my mouse gone? There. The interaction as such is buffered, it's not executed yet. The recorder looks into the chosen application profile in the recognition file and finds the dialect that a button would speak from the perspective of that application, analyzes the application, creates the actual object within producer, like a click interaction on a button of that dimension called create with the shortcut F8, which is all the information that's coming from that particular API request, and creates the corresponding object in the project. So that's the initial recording already here. Without proper profiles, the post-editing effort for the single author is high, which is not good. So already here, we should be able to rely on the robustness and the correctness of the profiles. And then, and this is where I have to fast forward because I missed the order. The first thing is that if re-recording, which is my example here, and desktop assistant is working in a similar way. Not 100% the same, but it doesn't matter. Yeah? From a theoretical point of view, it's the same. What it does is it looks, okay, that the transaction at that point foresees an interaction with a button called create, which has that dimension. So it searches it based on the technical data which was captured at that moment in time, finds it in the best case, and executes that particular interaction, even if the position of that particular button moved to wherever. Yeah, because that's a technical information that has been stored, not another. It's technical. So it's something which is supposed to be robust. Yeah, that is then again revalidated. Maybe something changed, maybe its name changed, maybe its shortcut changed. So it will be reanalyzed based upon probably a newer version of the same profile. Yeah, that also happens sometimes. However, the next step is that the interaction object is updated based upon the newly gathered data. And if we just translate this into the desktop assistance world, okay, you would not create a new object, you would create your highlight around and put your tooltip besides it, or make this being the second step of a 10-step guided tour, or whatever you would do. Yeah. Okay, desktop assistant, pages, objects are nice to have, but from a relevancy perspective, the page is the more important part. And the page dialects, the way that the page key is created and the number of attributes it contains, this is defined by the application profile, and the application profile contains a certain rule set that is responsible for that, which is called the header. So the famous page keys, how to read them. Let's see. I have 3 examples for you, and then we're going to move over to Producer to see some more. Again, please ask if there is something to ask. So page keys, they are, first of all, a set of one or different technologies, the orange part. We're going to see examples where more than one technology is in use as well. In that case, it's SAP GUI, so it's only the SAP technology that we talk to, one processor only. And this one processor gives us all those information. Here you see one with this active tabs, act tabs property in, because the second screen where we maintain users actually on transaction SU01 has more than one tab. So it adds that one. It's one more flavor of that page key, the one that has a tab. We distinguish between dynamic page key parameters and static page key parameters. Static would mean they usually do not change. And you could also say useless page key parameters. They are not really useless. From a technical perspective, they are needed. And you can do crazy things with them in some cases. But in most of the cases, the rule is clear, and this is how you should train. At least I do, and it works. If you look at such a key and you understand what it says, the active tab is address. The title of my transaction is maintain user. The transaction code is SU01. I understand that. Then it's something to take a look. If you don't understand that as a normal user, program, what's that? SB Rudel GUI? Win 0, I have no idea. And what a GUI may window is, I neither know. If you don't understand it, it is not important. So easy. Yeah? If you get it, you have to deal with it. If you have no idea what it is, what it does, in 99% of the cases, you can simply ignore it. You know, and this is why I split it here. Dynamic and static. Yeah? The statics usually do not change. Okay, in this one, no further action necessary. Yeah, it's straightforward. It could be dynamic, but it's very, very straightforward because it says maintain users. It's the initial screen. There is no individual part in that key. It looks very good. Besides the fact that you probably want one thing. You want the learning object, if we talk about desktop assistant, the learning object being visible to end users independent from where on that particular screen they are residing. There is the address tab and another tab and another tab, and you want this being part of the result list independent from the tab that was chosen by the user. And there is one paradigm in enable now to the page key that is a mantra that you always have to have present. We are as precise as we can be. That's from a development perspective, the paradigm behind it. Yeah, so we capture all the parameters that we can capture, and a re-recognition, a valid matching of content objects to that particular context is only if all of the parameters are matching, all of them, including the tab. That means for any occasion where the user would not be on the address tab, but one tab further, the learning object maintain user would not be part of its result list. If you want that, you have to somehow wildcard this tabs and say, we don't care about the tabs. As long as they are in maintained users speaking English and the transaction is SU01, we are good to go. Yeah, we don't care about the tab. That's what replacements do. This is what we do next. But first of all, the next examples. Next page key. Wait. Next page key. My Outlook inbox or any Outlook inbox on the Home tab in the inbox. Same thing. Technology, dynamic, static. Static, state value unchecked. No idea what that means. I don't care. Type 9. I have no idea what that means. I don't care. The bold ones I can't read and understand. ACT, MSO tabs. What's that? Active, Microsoft, Office, tab, Home. Same story as before. As soon as you are in an Outlook Office application, the Office application is split into tabs, and the tab is a relevant context parameter because probably on the Home tab you want to provide different help objects than on the Format tab or on the calendar or whatever. Yeah, so that's different. That's readable, and there is another part that is readable where we come to dynamic parts of the key, which is the text again. Text is always the title, and the title is the header of that particular window called inbox dash, and there comes the problem maker, username at sap.com dash Microsoft Outlook. I am username, yeah, I'm the author, I created this, I tested this, I rendered my desktop assistant, the desktop assistant works like a charm. I'm publishing this help package to my users. Who will ever see that? Nobody. Why? Because we are always, as mentioned earlier, as precise as we can be. And if user underscore name is part of the re-recognition rule of the page key, then if the user is Mr. Peter Meyer, then Peter Meyer does not match username. So it will not work, which means we have to neutralize that part and say, as long as we are on inbox, I don't care about the rest. That's what I would do. Yeah. Another thing to mention here is the language dependence. Yeah, sometimes, and that's still on the top 10 list of issues that end up in escalations. I've seen that the parameter is language dependent, but I made it language independent. I said, how did you do that? Yeah, I changed the 1 to a 0. No, that doesn't work. That's an information. This is nothing to modify. Yeah, that means, hey, this home button, this home tab is a language dependent part of that context because home in French is not home. Home in French could be whatever, yeah, and in Chinese it's per definition different. And if you contextualize things based on human readable text, the human readable text will be language dependent, which means you will have to redo contextualization per language and create variations of your help objects. No way around that. Yeah, but that's the indication. This is where you see if this is the case or not. Yeah, things are either language dependent or they are not, where the static parameters in most cases, because they are technical, are not, and the dynamic ones, because they are human readable, are. Last but not least, the calculator. Why that? Because that's the perfect example for a functional driven application with no further context, because I want to just give you an idea about process driven applications versus function driven applications. There's a third archetype called dialogue driven applications, which is from our perspective unhandleable actually. Maybe we come to that later, but the majority is either process driven or function driven. Comparing the keys that we had in place here, going just quickly back, maintain user is a process driven one. You start creating a user on step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 3 says now you are done, the user is created. It guides you through a step approach. There we can think in processes, which is good. In other applications like Outlook, the only actual process behind is writing emails and reading them. Yeah, it's a communication tool. It's function related. Yeah, there are a lot of functions around making it easier to read and write emails, but the only process behind is emails. So basically, there we need another level of granularity, and that's the functional subset. And the functional subset is, in most of the applications nowadays, something that is related to the tab that you are viewing. On the Format tab, you would talk about colors and fonts. On the Home tab of Outlook, you would talk about how to receive and send emails in general, as an example. And the perfect example for a purely function-driven calculator with absolutely no further context or details, because we don't expect anything in the calculator except numbers and plus minus buttons, is that one where we have 2 times the same information, 2 different technologies in use, MSAA and Windows. Why are they 2? Because the profile that was used for that purpose was the standard profile, and the standard profile follows a simple rule: I take what I can get. And because the calculator app is talking to us via Microsoft Accessibility API, because also a screen reader or a help tool for a blind person would be able to use the calculator, and Windows, which is the native API of Windows, telling us, okay, that window is called calculator, and they have the same name. In some cases they don't. In 90% or more of the cases they are equal. So that's the backside of the coin. If you do something with the standard profile and you have to do replacements, you have to do the replacements twice. That's the reason. Yeah, but beautiful. Nothing to bother. This will never change. Yeah, and obviously there is only one context for this, which is the page called calculator, which is an equivalent to the application context in that case. Yeah, it's all the same. So you would have always a full list of all the helps for the calculator visible in any occasion. Whatever you do with it, it would always be there. So page key replacements and a bit more. Let's go back to the producer. I added some learning objects here. Let's go into an SAP one first. SU01, as you see. Then first screen, the user maintenance initial screen, where the user names is created to is posted to create it later on. With a click on that button, that's the one that I had in my example. And then on that screen, we are in that major form where that user that we just created, called dummy something, is filled with data. And there we got tabs: the address tab, the logon tab, the SNC tab, the blah, and the blue and the blee tab. Yeah, so a lot of tabs. So let's compare. Here we expect 5 parameters because we are using an SAP profile and there is no tabs involved. Let's see. We are right. Program, text, title, transaction type, just as in our example. The human readable part of it is language dependent, but there is no somehow individual part in there that we need to neutralize. Okay. Next one. Maintain user. We have a tab. We have one more parameter. Active tabs is address, which reflects this is the active one. Here, a substitution would be necessary if we still want this help object being displayed in Desktop Assistant on any of those tabs within that screen, not on that particular one. And the rest is straightforward. Maintain user, but no individual values in here. So the only replacement that could be taken into consideration at that point is address versus all tabs, which would be a neutralization of that particular key parameter. Next one. Let's take MM03. What's MM03? It's also an SAP GUI transaction, other design, obviously. And sorry for having recorded this in German, but I had to use our P system. So that's my language there. So a material is opened. I will translate, recording as such as. So the material field is filled out. I want to show a material. I only want to see the basic data of that material, and I entered its number so I'm ending up here, and the material is a cover letter. Okay, yeah, we have some cover letters on stock. This is what I learned today. So basically, if we go back to that page and look at that key, what we are going to find is that show material, Materialanzeigen in German, first page, initial page, is very expected as being static. This won't change. Yeah? You could do whatever you want to that page. This won't change. So nothing to do here. But here, since I was requesting a material and now displaying it, the first line, the header of that transaction screen as such contains, now you see material 51009 blah blah, which has a certain vendor. Okay. And that's dynamic. Yeah? That means this help object would only be visible to people that by the chance are searching for cover letters with that particular number. No one else would see that. So what we need to replace here is, we probably want material show Anzeigen visible, because that identifies that particular context precisely. If you know, we know that the program here does that as well. Yeah, so we can just remove it completely and neutralize it completely. That's what I would do. But if we leave it like this untouched, no chance. Yeah? And it would be an absolute random thing that somebody would use 5100098. And in most of the cases, it's not even possible. Yeah? If you create a sales order, the sales order's number is used, any further try to create a sales order, the same number would fail. So this needs to go. And that's exactly what that page key replacement wizard is for. And what does it do? We will not go into very much details, because this is well described as well as in Info Center and in the SEN courses in Learning Hub. SEN 200 has a full chapter talking about page key replacements only, and the Info Center learning material for page key replacement wizards is pretty much fine as well. So you should do yourself a favor to look at this subsequent to that session, please. The important key takeaway from my perspective is that I want to emphasize you on discussing this as early as possible if you're in a customer project. Why? Yeah? Even if performance support is not even in scope. Because the experience told us that if you have a couple of 100 or 1,000 learning objects and you have to do this replacement, which is possible recursively. So I will run this replacement now on that part of the tree, and it will recursively modify all the ones below. So you could do that on your root level and do it for a complete big tree. But you need some knowledge about the application to really be able to judge whether a replacement is necessary or not. And the later you do it, the more likely the customer expert is not involved anymore. The consultants are gone. Yeah, no one will actually be able to do it, or the customer project says, "Oh, well, if that comes with effort, let's not do EPSS." Yeah? Who needs context sensitivity at the end? If you say, okay, we need to spend 2 days to clean up. And this is why I personally always try to train page key replacements in the author trainings already, even if the desktop assistant is not even in scope. Yeah, make authors do it, explain them how, because it's no rocket science at all. Or make the project manager do it on a regular basis, at least, to be able to circle back to the single author in case of questions. But do not just ignore it, yeah, because this is a showstopper. Yeah? Sometimes that's the only reason why we do not add value to the content by making it context sensitive, because that is too much effort then at the end. Good. So, however, context administration, there are 2 parts that we look to right now. The third, by the way, is the one for the pull help that I skipped. Yeah? Test context file. This is how you can test one of those context files we've seen in the very beginning. The ones that we look at now are those 2: replace, append, or replace or append executables, and replace page key attributes. The first one is a crisp one. From here downwards, it now gathered all the executable names, the SAP logon.exe, the winword.exe, and the chrome.exe, that all the application contexts that were found down here. This is SAP, this is also SAP, this is also SAP, this is Microsoft Word, and this is the browser. Works fine. Yeah? 3 times SAP, 1 time Word, 1 time browser. And then if you want to change something here, you can, to the selected one above, like Chrome, if you want to make that being cross-browser compatible, you would add firefox.exe here and append it. And then for any application context that was foreseen for Chrome, Firefox would be a valid context as well. Yeah? That's an absolute proper scenario. Besides that, you will use this very seldom, yeah, in very rare cases. Most of the time, but nevertheless, if you have to use it, you need to know that the function exists, because otherwise you cannot actually do something except going into each and every learning object and changing it manually, which you don't want. So the only reason that is common is you have a homegrown application, the customer is building it, and that developers, they are building their executable, and they use the executable's name for versioning, for instance. Right? It's the exe called Peter underscore v1 underscore beta. And then at the end, the application called Peter is finally built, and then it's only called Peter. But all the recordings have been done on Peter underscore version 1 underscore beta.exe. Either, if you don't know that functionality, that is a nightmare from an EPSS administrator's perspective and a lot of work, or you simply say, okay, this is going to be Peter.exe now, and replace all of them in one run, and you're good to go. That's one scenario where this could be handy. And appending is if an executable, which is also very rare, could have in different scenarios different executable names, but they should be dealt with the same way. This is especially if you run help on sublogon and you have other parts of your target audience working on Citrix or terminal servers. For that cases, the SAP logon is not SAP logon, but SAP lgpad.exe. This has another executable name because it's another edition that runs on terminal servers. However, this doesn't happen very often. I'm just emphasizing on you knowing that it's existing. The second part is more important, which is the replace page key attribute. So what it now does is it's crawling through the tree from here downwards. Yeah, that could be an infinitely deep and massive tree, then it takes longer to gather all the data, but nevertheless, it's not restricted anyhow. You do modifications, so obviously you need the write permission. Yeah, that's the prerequisite, which I have here. So, and what it gives us is a mixture of all the single page key parameters, the single lines from here downwards that it found from here to here. So it mixes HTML-based stuff and Microsoft accessibility-based stuff and SAP-based stuff in one list. And you see, we learned earlier that we have like 6 parameters accessible for SAP, but only 3 are visible here. That's a very nice thing, because only the ones that a replacement or a neutralization actually comes into play would be provided here. All the ones that you have to leave your hands off anyway are not even provided, or not even offered for modifications. This is good. So what does it do? Let's take MSA text as an example. That's the actual text, the name of the window as such. I can select a neutralization preset, and then you have all those predefined replacements or neutralizations that you usually need. Me personally, this set of things works for far more than 90% of all cases. The old world where you need intense regular expression knowledge is still there behind this gear wheel button, the advanced mode. But I'm usually training only this, and it works fine. So what can be done? We talked about that one where we want to get rid of that complete title in SAP, because we said if the title is gone, the transaction code in the program will take over. So basically the title is not really relevant. Which title was that? So we say neutralize value, specific value. Then we say show page key. So it shows all instances that are using this particular page key parameter. So the subtitle, and that's all SAP titles that are found from here downwards. So we got information, maintain user. There we go. Material, show material. That was our example. 2, 3 times. And we know this number needs to go. We also know the complete parameter can go. We don't care. So we double click that one, and it brings us into the value to find. And then we say, show me what would happen if I would replace them. And it says one replacement is done. So it's one project which would be affected by this. And there is 2 times, so means 2 steps, 2 page objects will be modified if I now press replace. And this is going to replace that complete string with a global wildcard and say, I don't care what's in there as long as the transaction code matches. This learning object will still be part of my result list and desktop assistant. Here we go. I'm skipping that. I just don't want to modify anything right now. Or next, and then the next one, double click, replace, double click, replace. This dialog is an absolute beauty. That really saves ages of time. Other presets, neutralize dates. Whatever date you probably wanna get rid of. There is a page key saying I'm the list of something, but from the 3rd of April, or I'm a requirement, but from the 4th of July and stuff. So just get rid of dates, because dates are killing our recognition per default. Yes, we can do that. Check whether there are some. In my case, there won't be some. But then you can neutralize all the dates. All email addresses. That's the office case we talked earlier. The office titles in general. That's one that really kills the docs and in Word and the Excel names and the PowerPoint names to have a proper office help just by one click. So this is a very powerful tool, and usually, again, more than 90% of all cases can be covered with that. And if you really go into detail, you can go one step further, and there we are talking about regular expressions. The regular expressions here, they are actually the ones that I was selecting before, and you could post, edit, and modify them. That's the SAP title, kill them all regular expression here. We will not go into detail regarding regular expressions. On the next slide, I can show you that one portal that I can really recommend for that purpose. It's a regular expression training portal and test and trial out portal that is really a beauty. I will show you in a second, but we will not go further here. Usually this is fine. The only thing, and this is what I just want to repeat, please, please, please make the customer authoring team clear that this is a preparation task to do for further usage of the content. Train it accordingly. Make sure that your audience understood the value of that little tiny action to take, and that they are really going to do it in whatever process. Mostly it will be done by the master authors or the project managers. Once a while, once every Friday in the maintenance slots or so. So that's page key replacements. So let's go one step further, and then we do a break. So what about profiles? Some tools to know, helpful ones. And that's just the last thing that I want to show you. That regex helper, it's called regex101.com, which is a super cool tool. Oh, I already had it open here. And this is what I'm usually using if I want to validate something that I want to do in reg expressions for replacements. Yeah? You would have a reg expression there. There are plenty of portals. Just give you examples for ultra complex regular expressions. And then from your page keys, you can then add a couple of examples here. Yeah, this one would delete dates that are in that syntax. Yeah? Day / month / year. Yeah, and it would leave invalid dates like the 33rd of this of April 2012 aside because it's not 100% matching. Yeah, because that first number would not match because there is no such date. If I do the 31st, it's matching again. Yeah, so this is what you can validate here. It comes with a complete reference of all regular expressions that you could use. What is listed here can be used in Enable now. You can create your own profile, store your favorite regexes here. You have a complete regex library linked. There's training material to learn regular expressions. So this is really a beauty that I can just recommend in case you want to go into detail. But again, in the most common cases, using context administration based on the presets is absolutely sufficient. The key thing is you need to understand what it does and why it's important and necessary. All right. Should we do a little break now for 5 minutes? Just get fresh coffee and then proceed. I will pause sharing and pause the So back from break, recording is running again. So let's see. Page key replacements and the necessity. One thing not explicitly mentioned yet, re-recording will not be affected by a replacement. The re-recorder will still work as precise or unprecise as before. Yeah, so there is nothing to consider in that context, like either or. No, re-recording works still fine afterwards. Going back to our deck. No, that was the browser. Where's our deck gone? There. Next one is the APA. So what can you do if you face an issue or if you face a request from a customer within a project saying, this is our new application, we still call it Peter, and Peter is homegrown, it's owned by our development team, and can we do something with the application called Peter with Enable now? The first thing that I'm usually doing is I'm activating the application profile editor, which is part of Producer, which is hidden behind an expert feature, or in that case, even two expert features called STE = 1 and STE_expert = 1, which gives you an additional entry, an additional menu in Producer. So after doing so, I will send the links later or put them to Jam, so you can get it from there. After doing so, you will have this additional functionality, and this editor that we see now is actually the editor which is used by the application profile designers to create custom profiles. It's a bit from developers for developers. It's not self-explaining at all, but that doesn't matter. For our purposes, from a consulting perspective, it's still an absolute valid tool to use. First of all, I have to open a so-called DAP. Since I had made a mistake, I added this to a very big work area with connected content. So basically it takes ages now before it opens, and maybe I killed it now. Oh no. Yeah, let's just wait. Going back was not a good idea. Come on, we don't have time. Now we got it. And I'm going to show you OneNote as an example. Yeah, it's a Microsoft application which is not part of our official covered set of applications from the Office suite. It's a valid requirement saying, can we actually do help for OneNote, or can't we? It's part of the Office suite, but we have no distinct profile for that. Yeah, just to give you an idea, application profiles, Microsoft Excel we got Outlook, we got PowerPoint, we got Word, we got the Office Basic profile, which is for online, and the lean one for the thin clients, but there is no OneNote in there. So okay, let's see what is about OneNote. And one option for sure is just to record with the standard profile a handful of times and everything works fine, it's still fine. But if the analysis is supposed to be more intense and more reliable, going like this makes sense. So first of all, how can I create such an analysis file, such a inspection page, to be able to see all those grids on top, where they give me all the technical data that such an application would potentially give us to be able to decide which one we're supposed to use. That happens if you record something. Those things internally are called DAPs, whatever, it's a historical name. On the user interface, they call it inspection page from whatever application, XYZ. You don't have to put that DAP in front, it's just for me to be able to distinguish in my tree. And then in that project, you use the project overrides, the project specific settings called project overrides, as you might know, for authoring recording. That's the second level that's only accessible from within. So for that particular project, I want to generate inspection pages. Yes, never put that active in standard. Yeah, it takes ages to create one of those pages. So only set that active for that one scenario where you need it, apply OK, and then record your page by recording, selecting the target application, and immediately pressing stop. I will not do that, that will eat too much of our time. But what happens for those never having tried this, your mouse will go wild. Yeah? Your mouse will be remote controlled by by producer, and will tackle all the objects one by one. Yeah? It will move from one object to the other and gather all the technical data that it can get from there. And the result, so you don't touch your mouse if this happens, so best is let it run and go drink a coffee, but leave it alone. No? So any interference could disturb that process. That's a bit fragile, but it's actually from developers for developers. We only use it for our purpose here and there. So after that is done, this is the outcome. Yeah, it says this is a button, or this is a button. That button is covered with the MSAA technology and with the UIA-COM technology and with the older UIA automation technology, and Windows knows that button as well. Yeah, and there we can look what actual information does each of the technologies provide. Yeah, MSAA says I'm the paste button, which is good, but that says paste bracket control V. That says the tooltip is not, if in that technology, where it belongs to, tooltip. It's part of the string. Do I want that? No. So I would rather go for the technology UIA-COM, which is the newer one, that gives me a proper name of the paste button called paste, and it tells me, yes, I'm a button. Yeah? And it has a certain tooltip that we can take advantage of because we have it as text. So this is the way to analyze. That is, next example, I'm a tab item. Yeah, in UIA-COM, the control types are very good readable. In MSAA, the control types are numbers, and you need to know those numbers. You need to know that a tab is the number 37. You Google for MSAA types, and you will find the complete listing. Yeah, so this is a tab, and it has a name, and it has a shortcut, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so from an object perspective, already the fact that the grid is looking that good is already a good sign. Yeah, so from our perspective, that is a brilliant application. And the second thing you can check within the ape, within the application profile editor, is what potential page key attributes are provided by that application. So not only object quality, also page key quality can be validated here. And that's the form you see. That's again all the technologies that have actually been analyzed, and some have values, some have not. What we learned is, for instance, that a higher level of precision within this target application called OneNote would be being able to distinguish between the Home tab, the Insert tab, and the Draw tab, and all the others. So what we need is a page key parameter for that purpose, which would be, for instance, Microsoft Accessibility Active Tab or UIA.com Active Tab. Both are empty. What does that mean for us? That means, and that's the response to the customer, yes, we will be able to provide proper recordings for Microsoft OneNote. We will be able to distribute those learning objects context sensitively, but our limitation in context is the application as such. We will not be able to distinguish between the single tabs, which leads to a conclusion. The conclusion is, if we would have a tab spanning process guide, a guided tour that says now move from home to insert, on insert use this and that, will probably fail because this is not a precise context modification. Yeah? So easy. That's basically a proper statement based on a simple diagnosis that we've done with functionality which is on board per definition. And the starting point is always such a DAP file, such an analytics file. One more thing you can do, you can apply application profiles. I loaded one previously, so you can load a profile into the editor. I loaded the standard profile, so it's loaded. And then I can simulate using this button here, analyze point, or use Control-Alt-X, what would happen if I would record this. And then you will find that, hey, the standard profile will give me a UIA.com standard response with a validity of 100% that this thing is called to do and has this size, which is a good sign. Next one, analyze the key. Yeah, so what does it do? It says, oh, it's again a valid, technically valid object from the type button, and its name is paste. And the score is 100%, so it's super valid. That's a fair statement to say for sure we will support OneNote, no issues. That's something that you should do from time to time. Again, just back to where we started, the way that the system gathers this information, this is a black box for us. For all the web stuff, we can interpret it because it's JavaScript, so we can read what it does and see what it does and probably even modify what it does if we speak JavaScript. I don't, I'm not a programmer. Maybe the one or the other of you is and can do that. I personally can't. For the processors, it says, no, it's not giving us that. But we know that this is a tab and we know that this is a tab. Yeah, so there could be a potential to modify the processor to be able to identify tabs even in OneNote. But this is nothing that we can take into consideration on a project level. Yeah? Because a modification of a processor is a change request in the core that could take 2 years. Yeah, so no chance. This is the foundation of decisions. Saying, yeah, probably yes, but it's an API technology, it's not web. And based on my analysis, which is coming with all the capabilities that producer has, for OneNote, we can't identify the tabs. I personally, as a non-programming skilled Enable Now consultant, cannot explain why this is. I can only judge that it is. And I can tell you that even if we would raise the change request next week, we wouldn't still not have a solution for that. Yeah? For everything which is scripted, which is web, which is coming rather from the browser, that's a complete different story. There we can always influence what we do. And For recording, it's the same. There is graphical fallbacks all the time, so you can use a bit of the layout to identify things and objects and distinguish, which is again something that will never ever work for recognition or re-recognition in desktop assistant because it's too slow. Yeah, so this is a bit of a walkthrough through the different options that we got. One more thing, we talked about that one profile already called generic web applications, which we would use for any of the web applications which are not on the below list. Let me just, because it's quite impressive, show you the Web v2 profile. I believe 100% of you have used it already. The SAP web profile is all SAP web front ends which have not a specific profile above. So it's not UI5, it's not SuccessFactors, it's not Sales Cloud, it's not Hybris, but all the others are using this. Enterprise Portal, old Web Dyn Pro transactions, old SAP GUI for HTML transactions, the NetWeaver business client in the browser, all those are using the same profile. That's a very powerful one and super robust. And you will see now that it really is because it's massive. It has a recognition XML of 1/4 of a megabyte. That's the biggest that we got. And it has a massive script in comparison with the others. So let's have a look in the script. And there you see what the options are. And what that thing does is, I scroll a bit down, it summarizes per technology all the potential CSS styles that a single object type could take from Enterprise Portal 6 downwards via the old SAP CRM, Enterprise Portal 7, the new Enterprise Portal, the NetWeaver Business Client. All the styles that are potentially in use for those web technologies are listed in here and are mapped to a specific, that's a hell of a job to maintain that thing, are mapped to specific object types. Yeah? And this is all the styles that it would accept. And for any SAP application, that is a super robust thing. For any non-SAP application where we cannot use Web Assistant, we could potentially script a mapping table like this and use Desktop Assistant instead. The only thing to be analyzed is, are the styles that are used within the application robust enough? Will they change when I reload my page or won't they? In most of the cases, they won't, but that's something that either is a discussion with the corresponding developer or something that you can try on your own. But there's the web scripts, the specific ones, they are always one-to-one mapping saying, if the object has that style, use, it's a button here, that's where it happens. If it's button, nur, st, row, whatever that says, we don't care, but we know that if that style is appended, it's a button. And your best friend in preparation of such discussions, also as to be able to judge whether something will work or not, is the F12 tool of the browser. So if you open F12, you will see the debugging window. It's a beauty since a while in Chrome, ultra powerful. Do yourself a favor. There is a lot of e-learning around the debugger in the internet. Take the standards. We don't need to go into super details, but you should have an idea about the element analysis and the network and the console, etc. And about that button, especially because that gives you the chance to analyze certain things on the screen. Clicking them will bring you to the source code of it. And there you have a clear view on classes, styles, a GLF epsilon, something that looks like dynamically generated. You could take note, refresh that page, Control F5, do the same again, and check whether that style changed. It did. So most likely this is not a robust class. So this is not an attribute of that web element that we could take into consideration for valid re-recording, okay? And anyhow, the F5 tool, either that way where you hover something and get a highlight of it, or the other way around, clicking it here to get the complete code segment that is the foundation of the corresponding object is highlighted. That's super handy, super helpful, and saves you ages of time. So that's the two flavors, API-based applications and script-based application profiles, which are more in the web. And for web ones, there is the famous ident script, and the ident script is the last piece of code that I want to chase through. This is actually the script that gives us the possibility to identify applications and propose the corresponding profile. And that is going to be a very important information in a second. So this one is the ident script of the Web v2 profile, and that can identify NetWeaver Business Client and a WebDynPro transaction in the same way, and it looks for certain attributes. Yeah. However, our development decided that those validly identify one of the given technologies that are supported by that app. It's the case. Yeah. So those ident scripts, they are super important for something that we're going to discuss now. After I asked again whether there are questions or not. Somehow I don't really believe that you are still awake.
Mike, I have a question for the unsupported application from other vendor. What needs an agreement from the vendor?
Yeah. The vendor agreement is necessary as soon as we somehow reverse engineer the target application's user interface. For everything that we from a consulting perspective actually can do, modifying a bit of a script, using one of the standard profiles, slightly modifying the page key of a standard profile to be able to interpret the target, stuff like that, there is no vendor agreement needed. If we come to the point that customer focuses on being able to use a distinct profile for a certain target application, which is a commercial application owned by somebody else, and we have to do a bit more intense reverse engineering. That's the moment in time where the request of the profile is handed over from you to support. Yeah, and from support to one of the profile developers. And these guys, they will cut the complete application apart. Yeah, they will cut it in pieces to really understand it, to be able to react on its way of working. And that's the moment in time where, from a legal perspective, we need a vendor agreement, because that fulfills that crime of reverse engineering, which is forbidden in Europe. You are not allowed to reverse engineer a commercial software that someone else holds IP on. Yeah, and that's the rule. Yeah, so as soon as the profile designers will start working, that's what they are going to ask you for. Is there a vendor agreement? If answer is yes, they will take it to their files. So if there's a written confirmation, it's fine. And if answer is no, they will simply not do anything. They will say, sorry, but we will not be able to help you.
Okay, so in the process, first the development team starts to analyze, and at a certain moment they ask us if they need an agreement.
Yes.
Okay, it's not
exactly.
a prerequisite to ask an agreement before to analyze.
No. Analyze should be done by you, and analyze should happen beforehand. And in the meantime, since the standard profile, so the two standard profiles, generic web application and standard, they became so mature and good that in a relevant portion of the cases, you will be fine with one of those, or a tiny adaptation where you probably put a page key parameter on top. And that's what we can do, consultants can do. Yeah, there we don't need an agreement. As soon as we start really developing something specific for that case, we need the vendor agreement.
Okay.
Goody. All right, so STE analyzes pages, always a good starting point. For web, going into the mapping tables and checking the scripts is always a good idea. And then if you want to even go deeper, I can just recommend the new Accessibility Insights tool from Microsoft. That is an overall accessibility tool from Microsoft that you can also run as plugins for the browser and as a Windows application. Since I'm going to upload the deck for you later to GEM, you have the link there. This is for overall analytics if you want to know how that application effectively works. Let me just give you an idea. Accessibility Insights. I actually found it yesterday preparing that session, because there are others. There is the Java Ferret, there is MSAA Explorer, thousands of different applications that are, but they have been all consolidated into this one. But it doesn't start. Where is this? There it goes. So I now use our controller again. So what you can do here, it's analyzing permanently, and then you hover something, and then you see the tree of that user interface here. Yeah, you see the depth, you see the hierarchy that this user interface is built, and you can analyze whether that single object has certain properties, like I'm a button, I'm a touch. Yeah, what basically that's one level above what I just showed you in application profile editor. Yeah, and you can switch on and off that auto toggling, and it drills down into the complete tree and gives you a proper idea of the depth of the tree. The depth of the tree is important to know, simply because our recorder stops at a certain level, because otherwise it takes too long. The iteration depth is limited to a certain depth, and if that's the point, that's a good information that you can give to support to fix your issue. Yeah, if you're saying lookup level is only 3, we only look 3 levels down, which would start here, 1, 2, 3, but the object is 1 further down than the one here, yeah, then our recorder wouldn't find it anymore, and then you have to modify something or address it more precise, stuff like that. However, it's more or less self-explaining. Have a look to it. It helps understanding user interface APIs a bit better. So then we got the F12 tools, we talked about it, and then for Java there are specific ones, but there is an issue with Java recognition right now anyway. And as soon as you face your first Java custom profile requirement, I would suggest that you drop me an email and we do a heads up before, yeah, because that's again something very special. All right, so now I have to speed up a bit. I hope we got page keys, and I hope we got the idea. You heard about headers in profiles and profiles as such. You heard about the different flavors of profiles, which are either API-based with one or many, or scripted, which would be a web-based profile again. But what does Desktop Assistant actually do with all those informations? Yeah? In this simple slide, you might have used it already because it's part of the delivery deck. We have plenty of content objects. In my example, it's 4. In real life, it could be 40,000. And those objects, they have either one or many page keys replaced properly to be able to really work each and everywhere. And the generate desktop assistant functionality is a simple harvesting procedure that harvests all those page keys together with the UIDs of the project they are living in, and packs them together into a file called lesson.js, which is basically, after being loaded by Desktop Assistant and held persistent in the working memory of the target computer, a 2-column table which says if that page key applies, provide that link and metadata, like a title and a description of that particular project to the end user. So what the desktop assistant does in a very simplified, explained in a very simplified manner, is on any screen change, whenever the focus change, whenever something on the screen changes in a more dramatically than just a moving banner or something, there's a threshold for that. So anytime it recognizes a screen change, either actively or passively, the desktop assistant checks that full table here and compares it with the current key and lists all the matching objects. Okay, that's what it does. Straightforward. So, but what about those playback profiles I mentioned 2 hours ago? And they are our secret weapon against lame desktop assistants. That was a finding after a while. I mean, I told you that desktop assistant from a technological perspective is already quite mature. It's there since ages, but content is king. Yeah, content needs to be created, and in the bigger projects, the content amount grows and grows and grows. And in the very large project, they ended up with more than 10,000 learning objects in one package of help, which is an absolute acceptable requirement, saying, yeah, this is what you sold us. We want all our content in that one thing. And it became slower and slower and slower. So response time, delays when screen changes were identified. At that moment here, where the screen change was identified, to crawl through all this information again, to find out what to look for, led to the fact that things were not acceptable anymore because end users blamed us to be the lamest online help on the planet. Yeah, that's what happened. And this is the moment in time where playback application profiles have been invented. So what are they doing? Yeah, they look the same. This is the application profile. That's the playback profile. All right. And here I just put in some screenshots about the files included, and you see, the regular application profile contains all the page and object definitions for all the use cases, meaning recognition XML is there. I have the object definition. I have the header, a full header, used for recognition and re-recognition in the same way. So that's that big beast of a project, of a profile. And now look at this one. This only contains the ignorable entity descriptor and only the famous header that we, as we now know, are using to define the dialect the page key must have to be able to identify the matching projects on page level, which is the heart of Desktop Assistant. And it's the same profile, but it's even smaller. 9 versus 6, a third smaller. So the playback profile is actually a derivative of the actual application profile, but based on its version and its flavor. I was talking about flavors earlier, like the page key has 5 attributes. In the other case, it has 6. For each of those flavors, there is one application a playback profile created per version, which leads to, in the first run, confusing views like this, where you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the same profile, and 102 objects are using this one, but 70 using this one, and 2 are using this one. What's that? Yeah, that's by intention, because those playback profiles are created per flavor and version. Also, application profiles underlie a versioning, they become better and better. But you cannot say, just because the application profile now became better, we will not recognize your old stuff anymore that you created 2 years ago. That would be unfair, right? So this is why there are always more than one of them. So best case, you leave this closed because you never have to touch it anyway. And it doesn't matter because they are tiny and they do not harm. So they are not bad guys. And on the other hand, there was a technical reason for that. And now I don't want to explain you the technical reason. There is an info center link dealing with all what I'm now talking about. Yeah, it's just for your reference. Go through the info center again in this context, because this is something that you really have to have on the radar. So let's see. What did Desktop Assistant so far? Desktop Assistant was, because the header is an important information, putting the header information into each learning object. That was a property that was since ever there. It was simply not visible. You as authors have not had access to it. You haven't seen it, but it was there. So there was a 100% redundant copy of the original application profiles header, which determines the dialect of the pages in each and every content object. This was consolidated into one of those desktop assist packages in that particular lesson.js file, which was at the end a big bastard. Yeah. And since this is loaded once every morning by each and every client, and each time something is changed and re-rendered, it's reloaded again, we ended up on the blacklist because of eating a lot of traffic. Yeah? We were just too noisy in the network after a while. And that was the other backside of the coin, the processing time going through that huge list, always comparing one by one with this header, whether the page key that is actually existing in my targeted application applies to one of them, one by one, just led to high processing time, which was actually the root cause for the delay mentioned earlier. Yeah? If you have 100 or 200 projects in your DA, don't care, yeah? That you won't see a difference. If it's a couple of thousand, it's a totally different story. Yeah? Then you will immediately realize that it's super fast in comparison with earlier if you go that way. What is this? Ding. Yeah, that's what it does now, since we have playback profiles. The playback profile only contains the header. The header is a combination of the profile's header, its version, and its flavor. So there could be multiple. This multiple header approach is coded into a numeric value, which clearly identifies the particular header per project. And the project only uses that number and points to the header. Redundancy prevented. No redundant information anymore, except that 8-digit number, so we don't care in comparison. And the files are far smaller. None of the network administrators is complaining anymore. In that one customer situation where we really are massive, we came down, I believe, from 12 megabytes to 1.2. Yeah, it was a 10% after, because of all that overhead. And if you imagine having a couple of thousand PCs once a day, loading that independently from each other one by one, that's a big difference. Yeah? That really makes the game. And the processing time is X times faster. Yeah, you will immediately realize. But, and now the buts, and please take care, this is important. First, to apply this functionality for the first time, there is an SAP node. I forgot to put you the link in here. I will do so. There is an SAP node that contains a specific script. And this specific script will establish itself. It's completely explained in the node in context administration. And it's called, no, not context administration. Where was it again? Where is optimized profiles gone? It's called optimized profiles, and in the morning it still was there. I have no idea where it is. Maybe someone killed it from my work area. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's just, I just wanted to show the entry because it doesn't do more than just executing. It has no progress bar, it has no nothing, it just does things. So it's not worth to present. However, this is what you do in the first run to do this, to generate all the playback application profiles you need. And that's the fact, it will remove the headers from the single objects, replace the headers with the hashes of the playback profiles, and then point to the playback profile, which is obviously a change to the project. So this is the moment in time where you need at least once all the write permissions for the complete tree to run that properly. Again, if you don't have any issues around response time of Desktop Assistant, You don't care. We don't do that just because we can, because that's the next chapter. It makes things a bit more complicated. But if you realize that there is room for improvement in terms of response time, the threshold would probably be 300, 400, 500 objects. Yeah, at that moment in time, you start realizing that it becomes slow, and this is the moment in time you consider that. You run that once, you have the playback profiles, and then Desktop Assistant will only take them into consideration. But as soon as you want to transfer content from one work area to another via DKP or using the import from functionality in Manager, in both cases, you have to take care manually and in your responsibility to take the playback profiles with you to the target work area, because otherwise the hash used in here will point to something that does not exist, which will simply lead to the fact that this will never be recognized anymore. And if you then, and that's the worst case scenario, delete the original work area and all the playback profiles, the content will be lost. Yeah, that's the biggest emphasis sign I found. Take care. Take your playback profiles with you as soon as you leave the boundaries of a work area in such a scenario. Besides that, it's an absolute beauty because it really speeds the whole thing up. So, and then we got one more level of improvement, which is the application identification, advanced application identification. There is one little tiny switch which came with 1911 or in the last release 2005, I'm not sure, called enable AI active. So what does it do? It lowers the processing time down to, that's close to real time, then that's really super fast, by reducing the catalog to search to the ones that are using the same recommendation that the recorder would give you when you initially record an object. Yeah, if you initially record something in Producer, the Producer suggests a profile. And in most of the cases, that's a good suggestion. But some authors think they are wiser than the recorder and say, but I want to use the other profile. And those, they will not be recognized anymore. Yeah, because the catalog is drilled down to all those, and the recommendation, the same functionality that is responsible for that recommendation is used to reduce the catalog to be searched in to find the right objects. If this is done in a valid way, we are in real time with Desktop Assistant, more or less independent from the amount of objects in there. But if you have objects, and this is not anyhow analyzable, this is something that is solved by training only. If you have content which is, for what reason ever, not recorded with the recommended profile, it won't be recognized by Desktop Assistant anymore at all unless you whitelist that profile. That means look at all of them that follow the recommendation, plus always this one. And this is the whitelist syntax. In the link on the previous slide, there is learning, so you get a complete process explanation how that works, how to whitelist, where to put those. So there's e-learning for that, no worries. But take care, yeah? Do never whitelist any generic web application profiles. So SAP Web v2 or so, this would kill the benefit initially. And if you would, let's say there is no valid threshold yet, but I found that even 3 is already too much. Yeah, so whitelist is your last resort. If you realize that that one guy in the production did that somehow wrong, and if it's just a handful of objects, reproducing them is the better choice than overdoing the whitelisting. Besides that, this little switch here makes a hell of a difference. Yeah, super fast in combination. So the procedure here would be headers become hashes, objects point to those hash values. Playback profiles are in use. That's already a big change. And then for big lists, this AAI approach really speeds the response time up to the very max. All right. Desktop Assistant in a nutshell. Any questions?
Only I missed the bit where you said you would let us, where we'd find the SAP note number that's got that script on it.
I will put it in on the corresponding slide and upload the slide to Gem later when we are done.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, then let's move forward. That was desktop assisted and recording and re-recording. So all what we need to create content. Now we are in web assistant contexts. Web assistant contexts are the other two that we have not dealt with yet. Yeah, so there is that context, that overloaded context parameter on container level. It's basically the equivalent of a page key in the web assistant world, and it reads app-screen bank account-analyze cache position. That's a proper key. In S/4HANA, either cloud or on-premise, it's obvious where it comes from because that string is part of the URL. We're going to see that in a second. Yeah. So since we were involved in that, it's easy because there is not even an API address. There is no JavaScript involved. We just get that served on the plate because it's part of the URL. We just have to cut everything behind the hash and we will have our context. That's an ultra easy way to do that. So that's the page context basically, and the equivalent of an application context in a web application, as mentioned earlier, and this is what Web Assistant is for, is the product's name, its version, and optionally a system ID that I personally actually have never seen being used. However, that's it. Yeah, that's the two contexts. You see, in comparison with that complexity, the complexity is coming from the flexibility of the regular recording engine. The Web Assistant's context handling is super simple. Yeah, it's really a complete different story. It's a combination of those, and they are either provided like this or for applications where this is not possible or where it's subsequently added. There is a JavaScript function that you can call, and that should be part of their code then, and then this sends the corresponding application ID, whatever that is, to Web Assistant, to the Web Assistant framework, and makes it work. So, and how to actually work with that, there is that one function in the Web Assistant behind the wheel gear when you're in edit mode, which is show context information, which is this guy here. And there it's the same thing. Yeah? Help key, shell home. Let's just quickly go back one slide. That's the help key. That or that. Yeah? And shell home surely is the most common one. That's the launchpad as such in a specific language, a specific product, and a specific version. And optionally, there is system and content roles, which usually are empty, maybe sooner or later. They will be filled as well. And then the environmental information about the help system and the UI5 version here, just for reference. But this is the equivalent. Let's go to producer in a recording that I made on a Fiori Launchpad. Supplier manage payment blocks. The app is the supplier app. I can manage payment blocks there. That's the app ID or the app context. And there we have the product name, S/4HANA Cloud in version 2.05.500 with no system ID as expected. The learning app context basically is not a context to my understanding, so that should rather be called learning app flavor or learning app doc type or whatever. This is just how it's under which filter criteria it's the learning app and what icon it becomes, it receives. So this has nothing to do with contexts at all. So I believe this was just a weird translation. But those two together, they are the Web Assistant context. And for the Web Assistant context, it's the same approach. If I'm going into this, a recording is always having several parts. Yeah? It's shell home in here. No, this didn't work well. I believe I started later. There we go. Yeah, it's supplier managed payment blocks, the one that I showed you on the front. And it's the page key and its content. Why are both filled actually? Because UI5 is potentially at least also supported by Desktop Assistant. This is why a page key is generated, and because you have to provide re-recording capabilities in the same manner as for SAP GUI and Office. So we need page keys, even if we know that this object will never be distributed via any other channel than Web Assistant, which would use this kind of context. We still need the other. But in that case, and that's the good thing, they are identical. No? The actual value is the same value. So they are using the same technology to identify the context. No? Otherwise, it would be a nightmare. Like this, it's fine. And those, if there would be several pages like supplier managed payment block, supplier payment block, and this and that, they would be on container level added, comma separated here. Why shell home is not in there, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I made a mistake, or shell home is now removed automatically, which would be a good thing, but I'm not sure. I just realized that. Okay, so this is the way forward when we talk about this.
Mike, can I
Sure.
just get clarification that I
Yeah.
understood correctly on your last point there, that regardless of whether the customer would want to use Web Assistant and never use Desktop Assistant, we still need page keys?
Yes.
Okay.
Because re-recording relies on page keys. And if you want to use re-recording, you need page keys, because re-recording does everything in basically the same way as Desktop Assistant would do.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a regular learning object, and that learning object probably underlies a version history. So we have to use re-recording, at least we have to offer it. And that's the reason why there are page keys.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else at that point?
I'm assuming that with all of the context stuff being, that Web Assistant needs being captured in a simulation project, that's going to help with the fabled opportunity to convert a simulation into Web Assistant guided tours that's rumored every so often.
Oof, I haven't heard about that rumor.
Yeah, blame Jesse. He's been talking it up for a year or so.
All right. No.
You know, like you can create Desktop Assistant guided tours. There's rumor that you'll be able to create Web Assistant guided tours
After a recording. Okay.
Yes, and I guess, you know, having this information in there kind of helps that. I didn't know if it was put in there to facilitate that or not, but I'm guessing not. It just happens to be a coincidence or something they can leverage.
It's coincidentally, the actual use case that is in use right now is the simple fact re-recording won't work without. So therefore you need it. But that there would be a second conversion functionality, might be, yeah. I don't know the roadmap by heart, but I haven't heard about that yet.
All right.
So
cool.
Maybe Jesse knows more than me.
Oh, I doubt it.
All right.
Thanks.
So let's see. So there we go. And then from that perspective of pages, which are pretty much straightforward, we come down to the objects, and there we have to think a bit different, at least. Yeah, not very much. Most likely a development would kill me for that, but what we are using here is called a selector, and the selector is a bit like the equivalent of an application profile from Web Assistant's perspective, yeah? At least function-wise. Technologically, it's a different story. It really identifies things based on capabilities that JavaScript gives us in the web context, but from a handling perspective, they are doing the same. The only difference is that you will not be able to touch those selectors. Either a selector exists or not. What you have to do from a consulting perspective is make your trainees aware of what which selector does, how they do it, and which one is preferable and which one would be not. This is why I added this table here from the manual into our slide. But let's go into practice first, and then coming back to that slide and talking about it again. I have two examples here. There is a success factors. Yeah, close, and log back in. So let's use success factors on the one hand and use S4 cloud as well. So a lot of login hustle. And there we go. Success factors with our famous admin, Ayana Xing. Curious whether she really exists under that name or not. And the goals app, which was jetzt a random pick. And here I'm going to my payment blocks just to see later where we are. So there we go. Let's see. Selectors is our topic. So our friend comes up. I'm toggling to edit mode, and what I'm usually doing, or it's the only chance that you got actually, to really get an idea from the web assistant's perspective about object quality, etc., is you create a dummy help tile. You start assigning the hotspot, and then you have the color-coded hovering functionality that you all most likely know. What is not that much known is the I button. For one reason ever, that's the most important actually. If you press I, you get that debugger window down there with coordinates and everything, and the recognition rule used currently by the rectangle that you have in focus. Yeah? And it says, I'm using the so-called text selector, and my element, the element is described with that selector by a role button, which is the role that it has from a code's perspective. And it contains a random number. That's what the 4 hashes say. Yeah? Numbers are ignored for re-recognition in Web Assistant per default. Again, we circle back to Desktop Assistant, you see here. There we would have to do that manually based on that as precise as possible paradigm. Here, development has been a bit wiser, saying if it's a number, we ignore it per default. The rest is already enough, right? But the important part is what is a good selector versus a bad one. That's a light green indication on top, and there is that flag in front. There's a flag, you see? If I'm moving a bit further down to the outer edge of my object, the whole thing becomes darker green and the flag disappears. And if you look to the bottom, I cannot move my mouse to show you because then I lose my focus, then the selector is different. The selector now is called data attribute selector, having an a hyperlink object, which is caged into that rectangle, that has a specific ID called data help ID with a style or with a value called BISX TGM template switcher, which in this page context seems to be as unique as it can be because the dark green selections are the ones that should be preferred. They are A, language independent because it does not take the actual text into consideration to re-recognize the object, but only the data help ID. If we read data help ID, we know they invented that for the sake of Web Assistant, so there is nothing more robust than that. Going back in, you see it changes. I'm a button, and my text is goal plan. It would work for the goal plan of another year because it's hashed out. You see it down there. But if the user changes the user interface language from English to French, goal plan would not be goal plan, but plan de goal, most likely. And then now nothing would work anymore, because then the text as such is taken into consideration for re-recognition. Same here, new selector, recognition rule down there, SFSF stable ID selector. That means for certain objects, especially in the shell on top, they said they are unique per default, but we will not add the data help ID. We're going to use ours because they are already unique. So there is a mapping somewhere saying if the style of this one, that's a style in that case, is B6 subtab, yeah, then it's unique. Same here. Yeah. So sometimes just hovering around and see what options you have is a quite wise idea, yeah? Before just starting creating stuff. Yeah? You have to get used to the different objects. And if you want to do that, by the way, this was a question I was asked lately from another consultant. So how can I look for drop downs here? Shift A. Shift A stops the function, then you can execute one action, and then the next action comes, and then you can go one level down in a drop down, for instance. Shift A is the magic button. I don't know. Usually you know, right? And they are language dependent as well, for instance. So that's the way to analyze. And there is not that much more we can do except providing advice, saying, guys, if you have the choice, going back to my slides, if you have the choice, use the ones which are dark green, because you will have less maintenance effort. In the scenario where probably the text as such changes, yeah, because the goal plan is not goal plan anymore, but whatever plan, or if a language change occurs. There are plenty of selectors. Let's take another example. Going to the S4 app, same approach, opening my editor, toggling to edit mode, and then adding a help tile as a dummy to get our hotspot dialog. And then let's see, that's a div. For what reason? It's an ID UI5 selector, and there you find the element tag that starts with __ XML. They are considered as robust per definition. Yeah? So they are unique IDs that are exclusive to S4, both on-prem and cloud. So if you see IDs with that start with that prefix, they are robust per default. Yeah? In that case, I would nevertheless not suggest to tag that, yeah, because the number is still taken into consideration. No, not in that case, sorry. I thought it was text, it is not. That's a logical one. Here you see, this is a number that makes no sense to tag. Even if the ID would be persistent, why would you add help to the first tile of a list where you cannot predict the amount of object in there? That makes no sense. There you would put it somewhere on top and point to it or so. What else do we have? Div, two different divs. The one that we see right now comes with the UI5 selector. Again, a tag that is exclusive to Fourier. __ XML view 3, blah, blah, blah. Absolute good. Going a bit further down, it just goes around the whole thing. And that's a generic selector again, which is robust, meaning green. In the most seldom cases, it's the DOM selector. That just means in the model, I realized that you tried to capture a certain object, which is a table in that case, but that table has absolutely no uniqueness at all. So you cannot use them, because that could be completely different. UI5 selector again, UI5 selector again, but robust, starting with __ XML. Yeah, this is how you get used to this. Yeah, just find out what methods of recognition are used, and based on that you can post a corresponding decision, recommendation to the customer. Good, but that's again, because desktop assistant has to be implemented into the target application beforehand, something that we for now only can apply on already supported applications, right? So let's have another look to the access flow. Sneak preview for the Web Assistant implementation guide. This will end up publicly accessible, at least in parts, together with the next release. But we talk about the next release in the Outlook in a second. For now, there's just one thing I want to tell you or want to show you additionally, which is the access flow for Web Assistant again. Where was it? Load initialize, I believe. Content delivery. And then we got extensibility, the most complex one. And there, I want to show you the setup. I'm fast forwarding this just because I want to show you the full picture. So this is you probably know that from our consulting slides, we used a bit different visualization there. You can just let me know which one you prefer for our standard decks for consulting. But however, this is how all this belongs together in the extensibility scenario. So basically, the application server hosts the application as such, which has to be loaded beforehand. Yeah, we integrate into the application for sure. Then the framework is loaded, the Web Assistant code, all the magic which is behind the question mark is loaded in the same browser into, more or less, into the application. The third thing that happens is that if standard content is available for that target application, like an S4 or something, S4HANA, then from our UACP server, the internal help server, the default help content is loaded into Web Assistant, but fully. And if you have an extensibility approach, the help objects that you want to replace with your custom ones is also loaded into the Web Assistant. And the mixing to decide which is given to the customer in the result list happens in the browser. So both lists are loaded for context help and guided tours, and the mixing takes place in the browser. While for standard content, it's different. For the standard tutorials, we use a connected work area, as you know, in the customer's work area. So we mirror them into here. And the mixing takes place here based on the extended work area that we put on top. So only the mixed content will be handed over to the learning tutorials. Yeah? And that has not that much to do with recognition, but nevertheless, it has something to do with the complexity in case we want to add, or we prepare ourselves to be able to add Web Assistant functionality into legacy applications. Yeah? So officially, we start POCs around that to be able to implement it into customer applications from the outside by starting next release. If you have concrete examples where this might be necessary, where it is necessary and might be already feasible somehow because it's homegrown or whatever, you can just drop me a mail and we can have a look together and probably start POCing this earlier. Please, 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 please do not overpromise anything in this context, okay? This is brand new for everybody, yeah? And if we succeed, we are happy, but we will not promise anything. Those POCs, I try. This is brownfield. We just try for now before we have a robust one. But the infrastructure will stay as complex. UACP will be gone, but the rest is the same. So this must be clear, yeah, and this can already be prepared. More or less. So, and if this is done, the next level would then be the recognition validation. And this is what I wanted to actually explain. Those selectors coming with those status, this is what we already got. You've already seen 5 or 6-ish in the demo. And next release, what we are going to get is hopefully, yeah, you never know, but most likely next release. And there will be something we call the manual selector. And that will be our entry door to any web application that could be in place. Because all the selectors that we use so far, they rely on some syntax specifics that are specific to SAP web applications, or are based on agreements that have been done between our development and the development of the target application. What we are looking for is generic approaches where we don't have to discuss, at least not that intensely, with the target applications developers, where we could potentially say, okay, we help ourselves. And that's the weapons that we use for that purpose. The CSS selector, the jQuery selector, and XPath expressions. I will not go into detail here. And all of you are that coding affine, yeah? Okay, know it, but that's fine. Yeah, no one expects that. If you have a certain development background, I just added the www.schools.com references, the learnings to those 3 technologies. Anyhow, reading the starting chapters and getting an idea of what those technologies can provide and how we are going to use them, because that's all written in here, is a wise thing to do. Because I mean, execution later is probably something that you will not do on your own, but in a consulting situation, making clear what's possible and what's not, and probably if analyzing an application with F12, having a clear idea of yeah, that could work, or no, that won't work at all, that's something that is definitely expected. And there, those references really help. I'm super excited about that, to get this up and running. Nevertheless, we need to load our framework. We need our place somewhere in the shell. We need to bring our code into the target. This is all things that still require a certain discussion with the programming team or the vendor. And if the vendor has to be involved, it's the same thing. We need an agreement here. Yeah? So same legal challenge that we are in on the other side in desktop assistance world. But nevertheless, 2011, if the feature makes it in, will be a milestone from that perspective, and things will become far more flexible as they are right now. So folks, last chapter, because that is the original reason why I was keen on having this topic as the first for this sequence of sessions, is the fact that we had a lot of escalations around recognition lately, from all regions. And I'm not blaming anybody, probably the sales guys, always pretending that we can do each and everything, but hey, they have to sell. But we have somehow to deal with that. Yeah? And from my personal perspective, clarity in a written form is the best way to deal with it in the earliest possible way. And this is why we invented recognition validation for services. And to my knowledge, at least, it is clearly marked as a mandatory portion for each and every service. It has never been done. So I'm asking myself why. If one of you ever did it in the way that we proposed, I'm happy to hear your experience right now. So unmute yourself, please. Otherwise, I see my doubts verified that this was simply never done. This is why I just, as a last topic, want to emphasize again on the necessity. I mean, we learned, I hope at least we learned a lot today about recognition and the technology behind it, but we cannot expect from one strategy workshop and some days of technological workstream consulting that the customer will understand it in that detail. So what we need is, within the infrastructure technology stream, this activity and this activity in the delivery documents is clearly explained. Hopefully, again, whenever you see room for improvement in the material that we provide, please tell us. Yeah, if we don't get feedback from you, and there is not that much feedback yet, we will not be able to improve the material and the approaches. However, this particular one is I'm really keen on having this as a mandatory part of each and every service. Even for the small Explore service, I want a statement about recognition being written down and officially, formally handed over to the customer. And that's that one portion of the service where you need access to the application owners. I mentioned application owners here, which could also be considered as power users. So any target audience, any person who is really has intimate knowledge of the target application to be able to answer technical questions in the same manner as we just discussed. So what it actually does is, and this is where I just need your feedback. Where is my folder? There. I have a deck for you. This is partly the slides that we've seen already today. Yeah, so the deck that we use today, this is a extended version of this one to make clear, and this is what I would use if I was you in strategy workshop already, say this is a mandatory part. The Fritz will kick me if I'm not doing this, so showing them what is actually to be done. It talks about target audience, it talks about context again, but the template provided is this one, which is cut in 2 sections, an overall section and a detailed section. And please use it from now on. Give me feedback immediately if you don't like the template or you need more or less information or whatever. As long as we have in a very early stage of the project a written agreement handed over officially that says we are leaving the standard here. We will try our best to make this work, but this is not part of the PAM, not part of the product availability matrix, etc., etc. So the template, it's again the first version. Let me just remove my example badges here. Has a summary that says a certain application owned by somebody in a certain version using, if there are several, a certain layout, has a best fit, which is somehow color coded, say this is fine with standard if you follow this advice. Same thing here. This is a standard web application from that vendor in that version. The generic web app works fine, but we have no page key that works fine. But we identified one based on the tools that I just showed you. And there's a change request pending that we request a certain additional application profile with one more page key parameter to be able to really fully support it or so. And then foreseen based on the template is one spreadsheet tab per app with the super detailed information. Yeah? And they are not all mandatory, but this is mandatory. What page key neutralizations do we foresee? With some words of explanation for the authors. This thing should be part of the authoring guideline. If there are profile modifications, we really want them to be documented. A general recognition statement that describes the quality should be posted here, and then at least a handful of example of page keys if we talk about desktop assistant or selector rules and selector strings, screenshots of it if we talk. That's for later when we talk about web assistant integration into foreign domains. Take your time, go through this template at least, and please let me know if you could work with it or not, or if you really see anything that I missed or that we should add. But please, 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 from now on, consider this as mandatory, and we're going to chase you for that. So if we got escalations based on recognition issues, the first people, as always, we're going to talk to will be sales. But the second thing that I will request before I take over the escalation, and the other champions will do it in the same way, will be the recognition statement. And if is no such a document, we have a discussion. Okay. Good, folks. A lot of technical stuff today. Unmute yourself and talk to me. Then I believe again that you were awake the whole time.
Mike, for the this part of the service for the recognition validation,
Yeah.
it's mandatory only for unsupported application.
Pardon me?
It's not mandatory for S4HANA and
No, for
success
S4HANA,
factors.
no.
No.
If the portions where we know that everything works fine, yeah. If you run it, you just say one line, everything fine, green, go. But usually we expect certain specifics there, yeah. And the specifics need to be mentioned. Pretending there is a target audience in your group, and 90% are using regular PCs because they go to the office, but 10% are using because they are road warriors, whatever, maintenance engineers, and they are using high secure notebooks, and they are using Citrix browsers there. And we want to equip this with, let's say, desktop assistant. Yeah? That's the 10% that are worth one tap, saying, and for those 10%, we will not be able to cover because that's a total different technology. Even if it looks the same, we have a remote access here. This is nothing we can support, and it's clearly stated. Yeah? This is still a standard application then, but the scenario is different, and this is what we want to see there. But no, if you go straight forward, S4HANA Launchpad, no. No one will need some more formalism here, for sure not. Yeah, but in normal cases, it's more than that. Okay?
Okay.
Any other remarks, feedback, questions? Please, please.
My remark, Mike, is that I will need to watch the recording again, and I think I may have more questions after I play around a little bit more on my own and see how much I can grasp in a practical sense, to understand, to know that I know what I'm doing. So yeah, I thank you for the session. It was very informative for me. I think I have a lot more to learn. So I'll definitely be reaching out.
Sure. Thank you, Judith. Bart, anything new to you?
No, it's a great explanation, much more clear of how the same fields are used for desktop assistant and web assistant contact, some of the same fields. That was very helpful. I think I've taken a stab at the recognition template in my last customer. Luckily, they're only focused on the S4, so that was very simple. I am dreading when I run into a custom app. Actually, this third-party web assistant, which I'm very excited about, this might help Edison in Los Angeles because they wanted to record desktop assistant content for UltiPro, and that only runs in Chrome, and they have, but recognition is really bad, mostly because UltiPro, the screens look different depending on your user role. So we found out that you have to have 3 sets of content, one for end users, one for supervisors, one for managers. And they said, oh God, that's just too much work. But because it wouldn't recognize otherwise, because the screens look totally different for each role.
All right.
But maybe Web Assistant will work. The third-party Web Assistant might work better for them over UltiPro. But what you said in the call today was they'd have to have an agreement with UltiPro for the SEN developers to build that third-party.
To inject. Basically, yes. Yeah, so that's at least the latest point in our internal discussion with legal. Yeah, that this is just handled in the same way as a reverse engineering, and we are not allowed to do that without a written agreement. Okay. Well, but if that's their ownership, and if for what reason ever the framework would probably be too old to provide ID namespaces, etc., that we could take advantage of with Web Assistant, remember the beginning. Yeah. They always have the regular pull help in the back of your mind. That's always something that can be taken into consideration. Is there an access already for that target that you were just mentioning? You can send it to me. We can have a look together.
UltiPro? Oh gosh, I did like an hour or 2 of testing with them last year sometime.
Okay. Yeah, if this is nothing where the customer is really crying for, then
No.
yeah, we have an official implementation guide. But if
Yeah.
there's an urgent action necessary anywhere, let me know and we can have a look together.
Okay. Yeah. In this case, it was like a once a year thing that supervisors had to do to fill out position requests for the coming year for their department.
All right.
And, you know, I said, look, how about a job aid? You know, I mean, you're going to put a lot of work into this on-screen help for a very small benefit.
Yeah,
So,
got it.
thank you, sir.
So, yeah, Andriette,
Just
hi.
one. Yeah, sorry. I just want to say thank you very much for running this again. It was really helpful, even especially just going back to the basics. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anything else? Otherwise, I would call it a day now. Stop the
Thank you,
recording.
Marco.
And say have a great weekend altogether.
Thank you, sir.
you, Mike.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mike.
Thank you, you
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye. Bye.